All right, hello and welcome to this training. As you can see from the title, what we're going to be covering today is mastering motivation and doing hard things. And as you can see from the overview, what we're going to be talking about more specifically is why doing hard things actually matters, the sources of resistance, overcoming initial resistance, dopamine and environment control, identity and mindset transformation, leveraging motivation and rewards, practical routines and lock-ins, and then the review and your action items for the day or the next few days. So without further ado, let's get started and talk about why doing hard things actually matters. So every meaningful transformation in life comes from stepping into discomfort and pushing through resistance of some sort, not from staying where it feels easy and safe. Some of the activities that matter most in our lives, like deep work, consistent training, disciplined study, building a business, creating art, even building a family, are by definition the ones that feel heavy or difficult in the moment, but rewarding in the long term. And they literally shape the person you become far more than the easy, low friction habits ever could. And if you think about it, easy paths don't build strong people. Scrolling endlessly, eating junk food, avoiding challenges, all of those things, they're pretty easy to do. These things, though, rob you of energy and confidence while leaving you with nothing really to show for it but regret. Now, hard paths, on the other hand, give you muscle, skill, wisdom, maybe a family, and prove that you can do more than you thought. The sweat of discomfort is what turns into the pride of growth. And that's why choosing difficulty is always a net positive, even if it doesn't feel that way in the moment. And I have another video on my channel talking about this specific thing, is always do the hard thing. Now, success in every arena, like wealth, health, love, and self, follows the same formula. Tackle the things that others avoid. While most people back down from discomfort, you will learn to lean into it through this training, and that single trait is what separates those who rise from those who stay stuck. Your willingness to embrace the hard road is what really sets the ceiling on your results in life. Think about what happens when you put off hard things. They don't disappear magically or something like that. They always stay there and they pile up in your mind and sometimes even physically around you, making you heavier, more anxious, and less confident. Now, avoidance breeds guilt and eats away at self-trust. On the other hand, when you attack hard things head on, you gain momentum, and that momentum is what creates a sense of power. That's why the ability to crave challenge is not optional. It's the foundation of lasting progress. But before we can build that craving, we need to face the honest truth about why our brains actually push back against effort in the first place. And we're going to be going deeper into this later on in the training, but to give you a quick rundown, your brain is wired for survival, and survival means conserving energy. Thousands of years, or let me backtrack. Survival doesn't necessarily mean conserving energy, but a part of survival is conserving energy. Thousands of years ago, taking the easy path literally saved calories and kept you alive. Today, that same instinct is what works against you because society has already covered those basic survival needs. What was once useful has now become a trap, keeping you away from growth. So if you picture two choices, for example, sitting and scrolling TikTok or sitting and writing the first page of a business plan, your brain sees them side by side and compares them, not by value, but by stimulation. And so TikTok delivers quick dopamine with almost zero effort on your part. You literally just have to flick your thumb. Writing, meanwhile, feels like climbing a hill. And that contrast is what your brain looks for and looks at. And it's what makes the hard choice feel nearly impossible, even when you logically know it's the better one. The real problem is not that hard things are objectively painful. A lot of them actually aren't painful necessarily, but that easy things are engineered to feel so much more rewarding by comparison. And that imbalance is what tricks your brain into choosing the path of least resistance again and again. And our brains are wired to look for and choose the path of least resistance. So you'll never escape the fact that the growth is uncomfortable and sometimes difficult, but you can change your relationship to that discomfort. You can teach your mind to actually crave the very resistance it once avoided. And that shift is where real transformation here begins, because you'll then love doing hard things. And once you see the necessity of doing hard things, the next question becomes very clear. Why does our brain actually throw up these walls of dread and procrastination and fear every time we actually try to do something difficult? Well, let's talk about the sources of resistance. So, resistance is not weakness, laziness, or some kind of a character flaw. A lot of people, they blame themselves and they guilt trip themselves because of this. They think that because they feel some kind of resistance towards difficult things, that they are flawed in one way or another, and that these people who actually do hard things are gifted in some way or another. They're not. Resistance is really the natural state of the human brain trying to conserve energy and to avoid pain and to protect your ego. And the brain evolved in an environment where survival depended on conserving calories and staying safe and avoiding risk. Now, if you think about hard things, all of them demand energy, they carry some sort of risk, and they threaten your identity. And that means your resistance is actually pretty predictable. We all have resistance, and it's not necessarily personal. When you finally understand where it comes from, you can stop treating it as proof that something's wrong with you, which is a very bad self-fulfilling prophecy to get into, and start seeing it as a challenge that can be actually dismantled piece by piece. And so the first piece of that is understanding emotional resistance. Now, emotional resistance is the first line of defense your brain uses to stop you from stepping into into effort. It shows up as dread, as procrastination, or that heavy, I don't feel like doing it feeling. The emotions aren't really telling the truth about the task itself, though, and they're magnifying it. And you can think of them as carnival mirrors. They stretch, they distort, and they exaggerate reality. So you can't necessarily believe them. The dread of a task expands with its perceived size. So, for example, telling yourself you're going to write an entire essay feels like a crushing boulder on your shoulders, but writing one sentence feels easy. It feels almost too easy to do. And the work hasn't necessarily changed. You're still writing, but the perception of scale has actually changed. And dread thrives on the illusion of this enormity. So the brain measures effort emotionally, not logically, a lot of the times. That's why Netflix can really absorb 6 hours of your day without any effort really on your part. But sending one important email can feel almost impossible. Yet sending an email takes 5 minutes, maybe. And so logic says the email is smaller, but your emotions paint it as heavier. This means one of the best ways to reduce resistance is to actually shrink the perceived size and break a task into fragments, essentially, because that will make the emotional weight manageable and tricks the brain into actually saying yes. On top of the dread, your neurochemistry matters as well. Dopamine is the molecule of anticipation, of craving, and of drive. If you've burned through it on fast dopamine activities such as scrolling or watching porn, eating junk food, or endless notifications, or video games maybe, or watching episode after episode on Netflix, you enter a dopamine deficit state. So in deficit, the brain doesn't have the fuel to really find those hard things attractive. Work feels flat, boring, and draining in comparison to that. And your desire radar is broken, so you default to easy stimulation. Now, the issue isn't just low dopamine, it's the comparison. Hard tasks naturally give smaller, slower dopamine payoffs. So if your brain is used to the fireworks of TikTok and sugar and, ordered food and etc., reading a book will feel like staring at a brick wall. It's not the book's fault, it's the warped baseline that you've actually created from all these other things. So if I constantly played video games or watched Netflix and ate junk food all the time, I wouldn't necessarily be able to create a training and talk about it for an hour, for example. It just wouldn't make sense. Even though, especially before having subscribers or before the views, it just wouldn't make sense for my brain necessarily. Why would I do that when I can just go and order some food and put on Netflix and just get the dopamine my brain needs that way? So humans make choices based on relative stimulation, not absolute value. The hard thing could objectively build your future, but the easy thing feels brighter in the moment. And this explains why a student can know that studying will change their life, but still ends up gaming all night. The brain weighs stimulation in real time, not the logical benefits of the hard task that might come years from now. And so resetting your dopamine baseline happens by cutting fast highs and making slower rewards competitive again through that. So by cutting those fast highs, those fast dopamine activities such as ordering food and watching Netflix and playing video games, your brain starts to love, or the harder tasks become competitive in comparison to those, because you now have more ways to actually get that dopamine. And because you've cut the fast highs, your brain will now reset to actually enjoying harder things. And believe it or not, over time, you'll actually experience more and more joy from actually doing those hard things, not because you've changed anything else, but the fact that you've just cut the other fast highs, basically fast high activities or fast dopamine activities. So emotions and chemistry aren't the only enemies, though. Resistance also comes from the most delicate and fragile part of you, which is your ego. The ego resists hard things because effort risks failure, and failure feels like identity death. If you attempt and fail, the story you tell yourself about who you are starts to crack. So your brain plays defense ahead of time. It tells you to not try, to not risk, and to not threaten the story. It's a survival mechanism for the self-image. And so fear of failure is the obvious version. If you apply for a job and get rejected, you face proof that you're not as capable as you hoped, or that's the kind of thought, at least, that your brain creates. It's not objectively true just because you got rejected. It's actually just math. It's probabilities, but your brain will create a personal story to paint you as some kind of an incapable fool of some sort. If you ask someone out and they say no, your confidence gets bruised. And the ego says, better not to try at all than to risk all that pain. And this is protection in the short term, but it's really poison in the long term. And it's actually a very bad way to think in general, because it's not objective. You protect your self-image by avoiding challenges, but you never gain evidence that you can actually succeed. And over time, this creates a prison of untapped potential. You feel safe, but you stay small. And if you look around, this is how most people live. And probably if you don't need to look that far. You can just look in your immediate family, most likely. And I'm not saying it in a bad way. That's completely said respectfully. However, you get the idea. Now, beyond fear, the ego resists anything inconsistent with your self-image. If you've spent years telling yourself that you're bad at math, then your brain will fight tooth and nail against studying math. Why? Because doing so will threaten the narrative that feels stable. And so humans crave consistency between their identity and their behavior. If the two clash, the brain creates friction. That's why going to the gym feels impossible if your self-image is lazy or unfit. The only way to shift is to just cast votes for the new identity. And each rep, each study session, and each attempt is a ballot that says, this is who I am now. And over time, the ego learns a new story and the resistance fades. And not only that, actually the ego will start confirming this new story over time and start looking for evidence to confirm this new story. So you can see how emotion and ego work together, but the emotion, basically what it does, it magnifies the pain, and the ego magnifies the risk. And together they whisper, don't do it. But there's a third source of resistance that often goes unnoticed, the kind of fuel you're burning, and which is motivation or energy. Now, motivation is energy, and like energy, it comes in different grades. If you run on the cheap fuel of extrinsic motivation, you'll constantly sputter and stall. If you run on clean fuel of intrinsic motivation, you'll keep going long after others quit. Now, external motivators like money, recognition, praise, approval, they all work in short bursts. And I'm not saying they're necessarily bad fundamentally. However, and they work. They have their time and place. You can use them for your own advantage. However, it's like an energy drink. You drink it, and after that, you get a crash. They give you a dopamine spike in anticipation, but once you get the prize, the chemical crash actually follows. And so that's why winning a trophy can feel electric for one night, but empty a week later. And this creates a dangerous cycle where you always need the next carrot and you're always chasing another prize. You burn out because your fuel is actually unstable. Now, what's even worse is extrinsic motivation keeps you dependent on others, on the external world. If they stop praising you or paying you enough, or if you stop getting the amount of validation you used to get, then your drive will start collapsing. Intrinsic motivation, on the other hand, is basically limitless if you can find it. And you can find intrinsic motivation in curiosity, mastery, autonomy, autotelicity, purpose, love for the process. Those are infinitely renewable. They turn hard things into games, missions, or crafts you actually want to return to. They create flow instead of friction. So curiosity, for example, makes the task feel like exploration. You're not forcing yourself to do the task. You're investigating, you're exploring an interest. Mastery makes the task feel like leveling up in a game. Each rep is some kind of a progress. You're becoming better with each rep, with each iteration of the task. And so each mistake becomes feedback rather than some kind of a failure. Now, autotelicity is love for the activity itself, just loving doing the thing. And then purpose is what makes the task feel meaningful. You're not just working, you've connected the task to something bigger than yourself, to some kind of a purpose, to a bigger meaning. You're contributing to something bigger. And then autonomy is what makes the task feel like a choice, not obligation. When you frame your effort as your own decision, then the resistance weakens. And the easiest way to explain this to you is, for example, there's people that actually love their jobs because nobody is actually making them go to those jobs. They actually it's their decision to go to those jobs. And they feel a sense of autonomy even though they have a job. And that's why they love it, because it gives them a sense of autonomy, because the decision is theirs. They've made the decision to go there, or at least reframed that in that way. And so by now you can see resistance is a three-headed beast. It's an emotion, ego, and weak fuel. And each head tries to keep you from the work that actually matters. But knowing this is only half the battle. The real test is really learning practical ways to slice through the fog in the exact moment it shows up so you can actually start. And that's where the real tactics come in next. So let's talk about overcoming initial resistance. So resistance is strongest at the very beginning of a task. Once you're moving, momentum really carries you forward, but those first few minutes always feel like you're dragging a boulder uphill. That's why a lot of people say starting is the hardest part. If you can get past the first threshold, the weights lift and the task becomes 10 times easier. So the problem is that most people never even cross that first threshold. They stand on the edge, overthinking, negotiating with themselves, and eventually they just walk away. This section is really about breaking that invisible wall with a few tactics and strategies so simple and effective that resistance has no time to really dig in. So think of initial resistance like static friction in physics. It takes more energy to get an object moving from rest than it does to keep it moving once it's already rolling. So your brain works the same way. Sitting down to actually start studying takes more willpower than continuing once you've already done 5 minutes. The key is to reduce the size of that starting push until it feels effortless. One of the best tools for this is really the 2-minute rule. It's deceptively simple. Commit to doing the hard thing for just 2 minutes. That's it. The brain can't really argue much with such a small demand, so it will give in. And once you've started, that inertia will kick in. It's rare to stop after 2 minutes because the hardest part, which is the beginning, is already behind you. Now, instead of promising yourself you'll study for 3 hours, you can promise to open the book and read 1 page. Instead of saying you'll work out for an hour, you can commit to just 10 push-ups. 2 minutes feels harmless, but it's enough to flip the switch. And this works because it reframes the effort. The dread of a mountain shrinks when it's broken down into small hills. And so your brain no longer feels overwhelmed, so it stops resisting. And once it realizes the mountain was mostly in your head, it lets you keep climbing. Now, shrinking the task is powerful, but sometimes even that isn't enough. That's where the trick of playing dress up comes into play. So starting doesn't always mean doing the full thing right away. Sometimes it means putting yourself in the position where doing the thing feels almost inevitable. And this is where getting ready, just the act of getting ready, shines. So you don't have to force yourself to work. You just have to go through the motions that lead into work. So for example, if you want to go to the gym but feel paralyzed, then don't commit to the workout, but rather commit to putting on your workout clothes and tying your shoes. Once you're dressed, it basically feels silly not to go. Now, if you want to study but feel drained, then just open your laptop, clear your desk, and lay out the textbook. No need to do anything in regards to studying. Once the tools are out, your brain will naturally lean towards using them at some point. So this works because environment cues shape behavior. You prime the brain by signaling we are in workout mode or we are in study mode, and the action follows almost automatically. Now, you can even gamify it by rewarding yourself just for completing the preparation. And that tiny win will build that momentum that will then carry into the main task. Now, preparation can sometimes get the engine humming, but sometimes the task still feels like too much. And that's when breaking it down into micro slices makes resistance basically vanish. So another technique here that you could use is the 5% rule. Basically reduce the task to the smallest slice of effort you're actually willing to do. It's about bypassing the emotional wall that blocks you. So ask yourself, what's the smallest version of this that I'd actually say yes to right now? And then just do that. So for example, if you're overwhelmed by the idea of running 5 kilometers, then just walk for 5 minutes. If you're intimidated by writing an essay, then write only the introduction sentence. That 5% slice is the doorway to the rest. So the 5% rule hacks the brain's fight or flight response. Resistance rises when the task feels threatening. But when you shrink it so much it feels harmless, the brain relaxes and you slip past the guard at the gate, essentially. And what happens next is crucial. Once you've done 5%, the brain often says, well, we're already here, we might as well just do more. And that's how small steps can snowball into big wins. Over time, just repeating this trick trains your brain to see hard tasks as approachable instead of intimidating. Now, sometimes shrinking or preparing isn't enough because hesitation itself is the enemy. That's where you need a more aggressive tactic. So that's where the 3-second rule comes in. Whenever you feel hesitation creeping in, just act within 3 seconds. Don't let the overthinking cycle spin up, because once it does, it will generate endless reasons to quit. So immediate action always cuts the loop before it actually starts. So for example, if you're seeing an email you've been avoiding, hit reply before your brain talks you out of it. If you feel the urge to work out fading, then stand up and start stretching within 3 seconds. The brain creates resistance through delay. So hesitation breeds rationalizations, and rationalizations kill action. So acting instantly will skip the negotiation and throw you straight into momentum. So you can count backwards from 3. So 3, 2, 1, go. And this will add a sense of urgency and trick the brain into thinking there's no time for debate. And also, the other thing is, while you're counting, you basically can't necessarily think about anything else. So Many people find that once they start with a 3-second rule, their whole day feels lighter because they're no longer weighed down by procrastination. Now, these tools like shrinking, preparing, fragmenting, and instant action all attack the initial wall of resistance from different angles, but they all lead to the same point, making starting easier than not starting. And once you're moving, the challenge shifts from beginning to staying consistent. And so once you've broken the initial wall, momentum becomes your best ally. Starting is the hardest part, but continuing is usually much easier because your brain has already switched gears. So you're no longer dragging yourself uphill, you're now coasting with gravity on your side. And the trick is to use that first spark wisely and turn it into a sustained flame. So when you do the first 2 minutes or the first 5% of a task, don't stop immediately after. Just ride the wave. And if you planned to read 1 page, for example, see if you can actually do 5. If you started with 10 push-ups, then keep going until you hit a set. Once you're in motion, it just feels easier to continue than to stop. And so momentum is like stacking dominoes. Each small action knocks over the next, and soon you're in full flow. The genius of this method is that you really stop relying on willpower and start relying on inertia. And willpower will just get you started, but inertia will get you finished. So think of your day as a sequence of dominoes and start with one task so small it's basically laughable, and just let it knock into the bigger ones. Lay out the gym clothes the night before, put them on in the morning, walk to the gym, and by the time you're there, working out is inevitable. The dominoes take care of themselves once the first one falls. But even momentum can basically falter if you let resistance sneak back in, and that's why having multiple entry points into hard work gives you layers of defense. So the first one practical tactic for creating that is creating multiple micro starts, meaning instead of relying on one way to begin, you create a toolbox of starting rituals. That way, even when resistance blocks one route, you have another ready. So your first ritual might be the 2-minute rule. If that fails, you use the 3-second countdown. If that fails, you shift to the just get dressed mode. And so each one is a doorway into the same room of effort. The more doors you create, the harder it becomes for resistance to shut them all. And this gives you flexibility. Some days, one method works better than another. And the important thing is that you always have an entry point. Over time, each of these rituals becomes a conditioned response, and you won't have to do them manually every time. Your brain will learn, when I hear the countdown, I move. When I put on the shoes, I exercise. These habits run on autopilot, bypassing resistance entirely. You just have to get there. You have to train your brain to get there. And this layered approach also prevents all or nothing thinking. If one tactic fails, you don't just quit. You actually just switch to another tactic. So having different ways to enter work is very powerful, but there's still one more layer, which is your relationship with discomfort itself. At the core, initial resistance is your brain recoiling from discomfort. It says, this feels heavy, let's avoid it. But discomfort itself is not the enemy. So the way you interpret it is, if you can flip the story around discomfort, resistance loses much of its bite. And so instead of saying, I don't feel like it, so I shouldn't, learn to say, I don't feel like it, and that's the signal I need to do it. Discomfort becomes the compass pointing towards growth. So think of discomfort as the price of admission to improvement. Every push-up costs a little discomfort, but the currency buys strength. Every page of study costs focus, but it buys knowledge. Once you see discomfort as a fair trade, you stop resenting it and start using it. Athletes already live by this rule. The soreness of training isn't a reason for them to stop. It's proof that they're on the right path sometimes. So apply the same to daily life. The task you most resist, calling a client, writing the report, cleaning your home, is likely the very task that builds the identity you want. And when discomfort becomes your compass, hesitation turns into a green light. But to make this real and repeatable, you also need systems that lock you in before resistance has a chance to regroup. So one way to do this is using pre-commitment. So pre-commitment is another powerful antidote to initial resistance. You lock in a decision ahead of time so the choice is made before emotions can even interfere. So by the time resistance shows up, the door is already closed. You've already made the decision. So the way you do that is by setting up your environment so the path of least resistance is the right one. So if you want to read at night, put the book on your pillow. If you want to work out in the morning, then put your shoes by the bed. These cues predecide the action. So tell someone else your plan. If you've committed to, for example, meeting a friend at the gym, skipping also becomes far harder. Accountability also is a tactic here, public accountability, because it transforms what feels optional into what feels necessary. And so even small bets or promises to yourself can work. You can promise to yourself to transfer money to a paying account. If you skip a habit. I used to do that with my brother. I would tell him that I would send him money literally if I skipped something. The cost of quitting now outweighs the cost of starting, because if you quit, then you have to send money. And so see pre-commitment as doing a favor for your future self. You take away their burden of decision by making it for them now. Now, pre-commitment locks in decisions ahead of time, but sometimes the battle isn't about choice, but rather about energy. If you don't have the energy to start, then resistance will always win. That's where managing your state becomes essential. So energy is important here. Many times resistance isn't purely mental, it's actually physical. So obviously, if you haven't been sleeping well, if you're dehydrated or you're underfed, every task will feel heavier. So you can't brute force yourself past biology. Sometimes you can do that, but for a very short amount of time. That's why managing your state is actually part of overcoming that initial resistance. So start with sleep. A rested brain just generally has more dopamine, more willpower, and more focus. Cut 1 hour of sleep and even the small tasks will start to feel unbearable. And prioritize recovery if you want to crush resistance. Now, food matters as well. A sugar crash or a heavy meal will drag you down. That's why I personally don't necessarily eat during the day. Stable energy from clean nutrition makes starting far easier. Dehydration alone can reduce focus and increase fatigue. So drinking water can sometimes be the simplest way to actually shrink your resistance. And movement as well. Even light physical movement can wake the body up. A short walk, a few stretches, or a burst of exercise flips your state into ready mode. So once energy is on your side, every tactic works better, and you're not dragging a half-empty body into battle. You're fully charged. So at that point, the focus shifts from how to start to how to sustain the fire once it's already lit. So let's talk about dopamine and environment control. So no matter how strong your mindset or how clever your tactics, if your dopamine system is wrecked and your environment is pulling you toward distraction, then you'll keep losing the fight. Now, discipline means stacking the game board so that the right choices feel easier and the wrong ones feel inconvenient. And when you manage dopamine and engineer your environment, you strip resistance of its power at the root. So dopamine is not about pleasure itself. It's about anticipation and drive. It's the chemical that makes you want to chase something, whether it's scrolling social media, eating junk food, or sitting down to write your book. If your dopamine is burned out on cheap stimulation, then you won't feel the pull towards hard work, no matter how much you logically care about it. So fast dopamine comes from engineered hits like TikTok, corn, ultra-processed food, and video games. And these spike your dopamine high and fast and then dump you into a deficit. And in that deficit state, normal, effortful tasks feel gray and lifeless. So the trap is that the brain remembers how easy the spike was, so it craves another quick hit. And that cycle is what trains you to avoid the slow, steady dopamine of meaningful work. So think about how drained you actually feel after binging Netflix or scrolling for hours. You're not just tired, you've burned through tomorrow's motivation today. Now, slow dopamine, on the other hand, comes from effortful activities like lifting weights, writing, reading, or building something. And these release dopamine more gradually, but the baseline lasts longer. It's the kind of motivation that basically compounds. Now, slow dopamine is sustainable because it's tied to progress and growth, not artificial spikes. Every time you get a dopamine reward from hard work, you're wiring your brain to crave the process itself. And that's how habits stick. So once you understand dopamine, the first practical step is obvious. Stop letting fast dopamine dominate your life. One of the most effective resets is a fast dopamine detox. So basically, cut out the high junk inputs, that steal your drive. Delete social media apps, cut back on processed food, block corn sites, cancel the endless notifications. And if it will feel brutal at first, and that's the point, but within days, your brain will start to recalibrate. The discomfort means your baseline is repairing itself. And so be prepared for those withdrawal symptoms. Your brain will scream for easy hits because it's used to high stimulation, and this is normal. So think of it as detoxing from a drug, essentially. And over time, suddenly reading, training, working out, working in general will not feel so unbearable. And within 1 to 2 weeks, hard things begin to feel more rewarding because your brain is hungry for dopamine again. That hunger is what pushes you towards slower, healthier sources by default. During detox, focus on celebrating small wins. Even cleaning your desk can feel good when your brain is actually rewiring. So reinforce this by journaling progress, tracking habits, or even rewarding yourself with non-dopamine spiking treats like a walk or a conversation or something else like a new book. Now, cutting things out leaves a void. And to make the detox sustainable, you need to transfer dopamine cravings into healthier channels. So dopamine reallocation is the art of replacing bad stimulation with good stimulation instead of leaving yourself in a vacuum. So if you rip away a high dopamine habit without giving your brain an alternative, then relapse is almost guaranteed. So instead of scrolling TikTok, replace it with reading a book with a coffee in hand, for example. Instead of video games, channel that craving for progress into the gym, where you can actually level up your real character. You can even transfer dopamine directly by bundling it with a good habit. For example, only allow yourself to drink your favorite tea while journaling, or only listen to your favorite podcast while walking outside. Over time, the brain will start linking the healthy activity with the dopamine hit, making you crave the good habit automatically. And this will prevent the crash of deprivation and keeps your motivation steady. Now, cutting junk and reallocating dopamine is powerful, but resistance will always try to creep back in through distractions. That's why you also need to physically lock yourself in. And what that means is engineering your environment. Engineering your environment basically removes the temptation before it even starts. So you have to realize that willpower is fragile, but structure is strong. If you remove easy access to bad options and make the good options automatic, then you don't have to really keep fighting the same battles every single day. So delete apps that steal your focus, unsubscribe from unnecessary emails, and block distracting websites. And also, don't meet up with people that pull you back down. And don't rely on resisting temptation, just remove it. Even small pings can drain your dopamine reserves. Each buzz, basically from your phone, trains your brain to crave novelty instead of focus. Turn them all off. Add friction to bad habits as well. If you want to quit gaming, then unplug the console after each use. If you want to stop scrolling, then log out of accounts so it takes effort to log back in. Your environment shapes behavior more than willpower ever will. So if your desk is cluttered with snacks and distractions, resistance wins before you even start. So clear your desk and place your tools in reach and create a space that screams productivity. So sometimes the best move is to just go somewhere you can't be distracted. Study in a quiet library, rent a small co-working space, or sit in a cafe where you know absolutely no one. On the flip side, you can make good habits frictionless. Put a water bottle at your desk. Keep your journal in plain sight. Lay out your gym clothes the night before. Environment is about control, but consistency requires rhythm. So that rhythm comes from routine. And when you create predictable routines for your body and for your mind, you reduce decision fatigue and free up energy for focus. Your biology runs on rhythms, and aligning with them makes motivation flow more naturally. So a few ways to do this is go to bed and wake up at the same time. This will anchor your hormones and makes your energy more reliable. Waking up groggy at random times will keep you in this constant fight against your own body. And most people just do that. They just randomly wake up and go to sleep whenever they feel like it. And it was one of the biggest shifts I made personally, is just going to bed at the same time and waking up at the same time. Now, nutrition. Again, eat at a regular schedule with stable fuel. random binges or starvation destabilize your dopamine and cortisol and make focus inconsistent. So slot movement into your day as well at consistent times. This not only will keep your energy high, but also regulates dopamine release in a steady way. And put deep, demanding work in the first 4 to 8 hours after waking, when dopamine and focus are both naturally highest, and save lighter, creative, or social tasks for later in the day. Now, routine protects your energy during the day, but the battle is often won or lost the night before. So what you do in the evening is also very important. Now, winning your evening sets up the next morning, basically. If you waste your dopamine stores on late night scrolling or TV, you will wake up depleted. If you wind down intentionally, then you will wake up sharp and motivated. So shut down all screens at least an hour before bed, and maybe even just read a book. Blue light and constant novelty will trick your brain into thinking it's still daytime. And replace stimulation with calm rituals such as stretching, reading, journaling, dimming lights. These cues tell your body it's time to recharge. Avoid making big decisions at night as well. Your willpower is lowest and you'll often choose what hurts tomorrow for the sake of comfort right now. And use evenings to set up tomorrow's momentum. Pack your bag, lay out your clothes, write down your priorities. Then tomorrow begins with momentum already on your side. So with dopamine restored, environment cleaned, and routines locked in, resistance has fewer ways to attack you. So the next step is to really upgrade the way you see yourself so that hard things aren't just something you force yourself into, they just become a part of who you actually are. So let's talk about identity and mindset transformation. So once you've cleaned up your dopamine and shaped your environment, the next layer is deeper, your identity and your mindset. And you can use tactics and hacks all day long, but if they clash with the story you tell yourself about who you are, the resistance will eventually overwhelm them. And the brain fights to keep your behavior consistent with your self-image. That means the ultimate victory doesn't come from sheer willpower. It comes from rewriting who you believe yourself to be. And when hard things are part of your identity, they will stop feeling like uphill battles and start feeling like natural expressions of who you are. So identity sits beneath every action like the root system of a tree. You can water the leaves all you want by trying new hacks, chasing new goals, piling on motivational speeches, but if the roots are rotten, then the tree just won't grow, regardless. So behavior is always downstream from identity. If you see yourself as someone who procrastinates, you'll find a way to stall, no matter how many tricks you know. If you see yourself as someone disciplined, you'll naturally default to action even on tough days. So the human brain is hardwired for self-consistency. It would rather sabotage a goal than shatter an identity, because identity feels like survival. That's why so many people start diets, go to the gym for 2 weeks, or launch new projects, only to crash back into old patterns. Their surface actions clash with the deeper identity they never actually bothered to rewire. So each choice you make is a ballot cast for the kind of person you're becoming. Now, one choice doesn't define you, but the collection of choices over time is what creates your self-image. When you skip the gym, that's a vote for I am someone who avoids effort. When you go, even for 10 minutes, that's a vote for I am someone who trains. And so the brain collects these votes constantly, tallying up evidence, and you're proving to yourself who you really are. So you can think of identity like a jar filling with pebbles. Each action is a pebble dropped inside. One pebble is small, but drop enough, and the jar basically becomes heavy with certainty. If you vote enough times for being fit, you eventually can't see yourself any other way. The good news is you don't need a perfect record. You just need enough consistent votes pointing in the direction of your desired identity. One missed workout doesn't erase I am someone who trains, but hundreds of skipped ones certainly will. If you want to be a writer, for example, write something daily, even if it's just a paragraph. You're not aiming for the perfect draft, you're just casting a vote. If you want to be wealthy, track your spending and investments. Even the act of tracking is really a vote for I am financially responsible. So identity without evidence is fantasy. You can sit on your couch chanting affirmations all day, but unless your actions actually back it up, the belief will collapse under pressure at some point. The brain needs proof. That's why willpower without action eventually burns out. It never converts into evidence. So a self-image built only on words is fragile because it's always one failure away from shattering. You've told yourself I'm disciplined but have no track record. One slip makes you question everything. And so evidence-based identity, on the other hand, is resilient. If you've proven to yourself hundreds of times that you're consistent, then one bad day won't shake you. You shrug it off because the weight of evidence outweighs the outlier. And so an athlete who has trained for years doesn't crumble from missing one session. His identity is cemented in evidence. He has way more evidence that he's actually an athlete than somebody who misses workouts. A business owner who's made sales every month for years doesn't question his skills after one lost deal or after one bad month. His identity as a closer is backed by proof. And so the more your actions align with your chosen identity, the less internal resistance you feel. The brain hates dissonance between self-image and behavior, and if you think of yourself as lazy, every attempt at hard work will create a clash that feels uncomfortable. If you see yourself as disciplined, hard work feels like the obvious thing to do because consistency erases friction. So humans will bend reality to protect their identity. If your actions don't match your story, you'll either quit the action or rewrite the story. That's why it's so important to actually consciously choose the identity you want to live by. Small, consistent behaviors compound into a strong identity because the brain starts expecting that pattern. Eventually, it feels harder to not do the thing than to do it. So if you run daily for months, the identity of a runner becomes so strong that skipping a run feels actually strange, like skipping brushing your teeth. If you meditate every morning, your self-image as a calm, grounded person becomes so ingrained that starting the day without meditation feels almost incomplete. And words matter here as well because words reinforce identity. So every time you say I have to or I need to, you subtly frame the task as external, as an obligation, something imposed on you. But when you say I am or I get to, you claim it as an identity. And so the shift is subtle but powerful. Instead of fighting yourself, you align with yourself. So swap I have to work out with I am someone who trains or I get to work out. Swap I need to study with I am a focused learner or I get to study. I get to become a focused learner. The task changes from a chore to an expression of who you actually are. And it also can be reframed into gratefulness for the task itself. So for example, I get to work out is you being grateful to be able to work out. So pay attention to the tiny moments when you say, I'm just not a morning person, for example, because you're voting for the lazy version of yourself. When you say, I'm becoming someone who wakes up early, you're carving a new identity, if that's the type of person you want to be. Some people don't necessarily need to wake up early and they don't want to, and that's completely fine. It has nothing to do with success. A smoker who says, I'm trying to quit, reinforces I am a smoker. And so a smoker who says, I don't smoke, steps into I am a non-smoker. The language pulls identity forward even before the habit is fully built. And again, another example here is an entrepreneur who says, I'm trying to start a business, frames it as optional. One who says, I am building my business, frames it as inevitable. And so when identity shifts, actions just follow naturally. You no longer have to force yourself with hacks or tricks. The behavior becomes the obvious move, but identity alone isn't enough. To really cement it, you also need to transform the way you handle discomfort, how you process focus and ego pressure, because those are the daily frictions that either reinforce or erode the identity you're actually building. So once identity becomes a compass, the next barrier to break is how you view discomfort itself. Most people treat discomfort as the enemy, and they think that pain means stop, that unease means something's wrong. But discomfort is actually the price of admission for growth. If you never feel it, then you're not necessarily growing. The resistance you feel is often proof that you're right where you need to be. So think of discomfort like currency. Every rep of effort you spend buys you a new level of skill, strength, or clarity, like we talked about earlier. The bigger the discomfort, the bigger the reward it purchases. So the sting of lifting weights buys you a stronger body. The awkwardness of a sales call buys you confidence and income. The frustration of writing drafts buys you a finished book. And when you see discomfort as that transaction instead of a punishment of some sort, resistance transforms into willingness. And so discomfort can even be used as a compass, as we talked about earlier, on what to do. If two paths lie ahead, the one with more discomfort usually hides more growth. So your body recoils, but your future self points at it saying, this is the way. And so instead of saying, I don't feel like it, so I'll skip it, then try, I don't feel like it, which means it matters. And so the fact that your brain resists is often just proof that it's important. Now, changing the meaning of discomfort changes everything, but you also need to shift your focus away from distant results and into the joy of the process itself. Chasing only end goals creates burnout. You run on extrinsic motivation, always waiting for the next milestone. And the problem is that milestones are far apart, and between them is this huge desert. Now, the antidote is to fall in love with the process itself. This is what's called autotelicity. Doing something because the act itself is rewarding, not just for what it produces. And this is where the paradox of discipline comes in. When you stop obsessing about the result and learn to enjoy the discipline itself, you actually get the result way faster. And so a disciplined athlete finds joy in the grind of practice, not just the glory of the competition. That joy is what makes him unstoppable. A disciplined student finds curiosity in solving problems, not just pride in the grade. That curiosity keeps him studying even when no one is watching. And so loving the process also unlocks flow states where work feels effortless. Flow comes from being fully absorbed in a task for its own sake. This is the state that rewires your brain to crave deep, hard work instead of cheap stimulation. Flow is most easily triggered when you work at the edge of your skill level. Not too easy to be boring, but also not too hard to be overwhelming. And so the reward of flow isn't just productivity, it's the feeling of fulfillment. You walk away energized instead of drained. So process love is powerful, but sometimes the pressure from the ego still gets in the way. And that's why learning to lower the stakes and detach from the ego and from ego outcomes is essential. Now, the ego resists hard things because it wants to protect self-image, or because sometimes it wants to be perfect, and in that way to protect the self-image. It hates failure, it hates embarrassment, and it hates imperfection. The solution is to take the pressure off and turn hard work into a game. When you approach tasks with curiosity and play, the ego actually relaxes, and you stop obsessing over what if I fail and start wondering, what can I learn here? So turn tasks into challenges. How quickly can I get into focus? How much can I improve in one session? Actually gamifying the work is what transforms it from a threat into a playground. And injecting fun into effort removes heaviness. Even silly rewards or self-made challenges can shift the vibe from pressure to play. And so treat work like an experiment instead of a test. If it goes well, great. If it doesn't, great as well. You learn in both cases. You learn in one case, you learn what works, and in the other case, you learn what doesn't. Either way, the ego can't label it as failure because it's a win-win, because you learn either way. So replace judgment with curiosity, and instead of I suck at this, try interesting, why did this go wrong? Over time, this experimental mindset, the scientific mindset, makes you resilient, because failure stops feeling like an identity death and starts feeling like feedback. And so once you've rewritten identity, reframed discomfort, and embraced process love, and quieted the ego, resistance loses its sharpest edges. And so there's still one more level, tapping into the deeper motivational forces that fuel you from within. So let's talk about leveraging motivation and rewards. So even with identity shifts and strong routines, you'll still face days where motivation feels thin and resistance creeps back in. And this is where the clever use of rewards and motivators comes in. The brain is not just a machine for discipline. It doesn't work that way. It's a machine for seeking reward. Instead of fighting that, you can actually harness it. So stacking rewards onto hard things, aligning tasks with your natural neurochemistry, and fueling yourself with the deepest drivers that never run dry. When you learn how to leverage motivation instead of waiting for it, you become unstoppable. So one of the simplest yet most powerful strategies is habit bundling, also known as temptation bundling. And this is the art of pairing something enjoyable with something effortful, so your brain starts linking the two. You take a habit you resist and you glue it to a habit you actually crave. For example, only watching your favorite show while doing cardio, only allowing yourself coffee while studying, only listening to a podcast while cooking clean meals. Suddenly, the task you resisted becomes the gateway to something you actually want. And so, this works because the brain builds associations quickly. If every time you do cardio, you also get your favorite show, cardio starts carrying its own dopamine reward. Over time, you stop needing the bundle because the brain learns to crave the effort itself. So if you dread long walks, save an audiobook you love for those walks only. Soon, the walk becomes the highlight of your day. If you resist writing, allow yourself to light a special candle and play a favorite playlist only during writing time. The environment itself becomes rewarding. And so bundling gets you in the door, but when you do the hard work also matters. Timing your efforts to align with your biology makes the difference between grinding uphill and flowing downhill. So your brain is not equally primed all day. Neurochemicals like dopamine, cortisol, and norepinephrine rise and fall in predictable rhythms. If you align your hardest work with your natural peaks, resistance plummets. So the first 4 to 8 hours after waking are prime for deep analytical work. Dopamine is high, cortisol is elevated, and your focus is sharp. This is the time for studying, building, evolving, or executing the most demanding tasks. Write your book in the morning when focus is strongest, not at night when you're drained, unless you find that you're more creative at night, especially if you're doing creative work. For a lot of people, that's when they feel the most creative. Tackle financial analysis or coding early in the day and leave meetings and calls for later. So that's the first phase, the first 4 to 8 hours after waking. Now, phase 2 is later in the day when dopamine tapers off, creativity and social energy rise. This is the time for brainstorming and networking, light tasks, or physical activity. So schedule brainstorming sessions or content creation for the afternoon. Do your workouts in the evening if they recharge rather than drain you, and understand your personal chronotype. For example, if you're an early bird or a night owl, etc. Because once you understand that, that fine-tunes everything further, and you can now use biology instead of fighting it all the time. And timing optimizes your natural rhythms as well, but lasting drive comes from going beyond external hacks into the core motivators that fuel human ambition from the inside out. So extrinsic motivators like money, or praise fade quickly. Intrinsic motivators, however, are self-sustaining. They don't depend on outside approval. They come from within. And when these 5 motivators are maximized, hard work transforms from a chore into something magnetic. So remember how we talked earlier about curiosity, mastery, autotelicity, purpose, autonomy. Well, curiosity, like we said earlier, makes the effort feel like exploration. You stop asking, do I have to, and start asking, what will I discover? So make tasks into puzzles. If you're learning sales, treat every call as a detective game. What hidden motive is driving this person, for example? If you're studying, then chase rabbit holes of genuine interest. Curiosity keeps the fire alive long after willpower fades. And so mastery is, as we talked earlier, the drive to keep improving. Each rep is not just work, it's just a step towards excellence. So track your progress obsessively, record times, weights, or some kind of milestone so you can see improvement actually stacking up. And treat mistakes as feedback loops. Each one tells you where the next level of mastery lives and where you should improve. Autotelicity is the joy of doing something for its own sake. The task becomes the reward. So find activities where you naturally slip into flow and then double down on them. And reframe boring tasks by connecting them to skills you already enjoy. For example, turn writing into a storytelling challenge instead of homework. And to trick your brain to crave hard things, you must move away from fantasizing about the distant end goal and instead learn to enjoy the process, like we talked about. So you must find pleasure and fulfillment in the thing in the present moment for its own sake. If you can achieve this, then the activity itself will generate its own motivation as you do it and allow you to become fully immersed. So realizing that the effort is the reward is central to this. When you embrace the struggle, the effort and the reward are viewed as the same thing, which unlocks everlasting discipline. And successful people, such as musicians and athletes, often operate from a mindset where they basically describe the activity not as practice, which implies some kind of an outcome, but rather as playing or simply doing what I do at home, focusing on the enjoyment of the repetition itself. This aligns the hard activity with your core identity and reduces the mental resistance. Now, the next one is purpose. Purpose connects your effort to something bigger than yourself. It makes every small task meaningful. And so tie your daily to-do list to a larger mission. Cleaning your house is not just a chore now, but rather creating an environment of peace. Making sales calls is not just numbers, but rather building financial freedom for your family. Write down your why and keep it in sight. And when motivation dips, just look at that reminder of what your why is. And I know it sounds weird, but we often just forget the reasons of why we do the things we do, and that's why we have no motivation to do them. So when motivation dips, just the reminder will pull you forward. And the next one is autonomy. So autonomy gives you control over your path. You feel motivated when the effort feels like your choice, not some kind of an obligation. So frame every action as your decision. You're not forced to work. You're choosing because of the future it will build. Even in jobs with low autonomy, you can reframe the role as a stepping stone in your larger vision in life. So these intrinsic motivators create a furnace that burns endlessly. But even with all this fire, you'll still have moments of inner conflict when one part of you wants the goal and another part just wants some comfort. That's where the art of self-negotiation comes in. So most people try to ignore or suppress the rebellious voice in their head, but that only really makes it louder. The smarter play is to actually acknowledge it, to talk to it, and strike a deal. When you negotiate with yourself, you turn an enemy into an ally. So give the resistant voice a name. This is my lazy side talking, or these are my demons, or something like that. This is comfort me speaking. Labeling it will separate it from your core self, so you can actually negotiate with it. You're personifying it essentially. So ask what it really wants. Usually it's not laziness. It could be fatigue. It could be boredom. It can be the need for novelty. By understanding its need, you can actually satisfy it without abandoning the hard work. So if comfort you wants entertainment, put on music while working, for example. If comfort you wants rest, then promise a short break after one focused sprint. This keeps you from falling into the all or nothing traps. You don't need to crush resistance, you just need to redirect it. And over time, the inner rebel will calm down because it feels hard. So, because it feels heard. So, when you know how to bundle rewards, align with your biology, fuel intrinsic motivators, and negotiate with yourself, hard work stops being a constant fight. It becomes something you look forward to. But to keep the state permanent, you'll need practical structures and lock-ins that actually make your systems bulletproof even on your worst days. So let's talk about practical routines and lock-ins. So tactics, motivation, and even identity shifts are fragile if they aren't backed by systems that make success automatic. The truth is, discipline is about creating routines and lock-ins that carry you even when your energy, willpower, or emotions aren't on your side. So without systems, every day becomes a new negotiation with resistance. With systems, the decision is already made before the day begins. And this section is about building the kind of daily structures that anchor your discipline and lock you into forward motion no matter what mood you wake up in. So the morning routine isn't a cliche. It can be, honestly, for some people, the keystone habit that determines the trajectory of their entire day. If you win the morning, the rest of the day falls into alignment. If you lose it, you spend the day trying to climb out of a hole. And so the goal is to design a series of actions that stack momentum before resistance has a chance to speak. So you can start with a consistent wake-up time. Waking up at different times really confuses your biology and scrambles your dopamine rhythms. So waking up consistently creates hormonal stability and predictable energy. You can also build a repeatable sequence that immediately sets the tone. This could include hydration, light movement, and some form of mental priming like journaling or visualization. They are signals to your brain that the day has started with intention. So wake up, for example, drink water, stretch for 5 minutes, and then write down your top 3 priorities. And by the time you've done that, you've already cast votes for clarity and control. And you can start your day with 10 minutes of reading instead of scrolling. The first thing you feed your brain will create a mental momentum loop that repeats itself all day. Now, morning routines can get you started, but what keeps you steady is having systems that strip choice from the equation. So automation is discipline on autopilot. When a system makes the right action the default action, you no longer waste energy deciding. The fewer decisions you leave to willpower, the more reliable your execution becomes. Place cues for good habits directly in your line of sight and put your running shoes next to your bed, for example. Keep your guitar in the middle of the room or leave your study materials on your desk. The less friction between you and the habit, the more likely it happens. And remove cues for bad habits. If junk food is in the house, you'll most likely eat it. It's just the path of least resistance. If social media is on your phone, you'll scroll. If distractions are one click away, you'll click. Make bad options harder than good ones. Delete all fast dopamine apps and only allow them on a secondary device you rarely use, for example. That friction is often enough to kill the impulse. Or log out of all social media accounts that you have on your phone or on your computer. Just that friction of having to log back in is what will kill the impulse. And you can also block distracting websites during your work hours using software, because when the temptation isn't available, you don't necessarily need willpower to fight it. And so automating decisions keeps your energy free, but to really lock in those habits, you need routines that repeat at predictable times until they become rituals. And so humans thrive on rhythm. The body runs on circadian cycles and the mind craves predictability. When you align your habits with the same time and place each day, they shift from being conscious decisions to unconscious rituals. Do the same key behaviors at the same times and train at the same hour, eat at the same hour, and block deep work at the same hour. That repetition is what will wire these actions into your nervous system. That's why routines are so important in actually laying them out. I, for example, don't even have to think about what the next task of my day is because I've been doing it for so long, every day in the same way at the same time, and it just repeats. And anchor new habits into existing ones. If you already brush your teeth, then anchor meditation immediately after. If you already drink coffee, then you can anchor journaling to it. Linking habits together is what creates these chains that are harder to break. And you can meditate after you brush your teeth, exercise right after work, right as soon as you finish your morning reading. Over time, one behavior automatically triggers the next. And you can stack healthy habits in the evening, turn off screens, read, then prepare tomorrow's to-do list, for example. This is a chain that can build a reliable wind-down ritual. And routines make habits predictable, but sometimes you need stronger insurance policies to stop yourself from slipping back into comfort. Now, commitment devices are tools that lock you into behavior by raising the cost of quitting. They make it harder to back out once you've already set things in motion. So, for example, you can announce your goals to someone who matters to you. The social cost of failing often outweighs the temporary discomfort of action. If you tell your friend you'll send them proof of your workout every day, you'll go just to avoid the embarrassment of lying. And there's a person I saw on online that basically is posting their to-do list every single day on their account, and then basically providing proof that they've completed their to-do list. So that's another strategy you can actually do to just commit to something, to commit to your goals. Now, another way you could do it is put money on the line. Bet on yourself with a friend or use apps that withdraw money if you miss a habit. Humans are wired to avoid loss, sometimes more than to gain something. So financial stakes will push you through that resistance. So sign up for a race months or weeks ahead of time. And for example, paying the entry fee will create a financial and social lock-in that forces you to train. Or hire a coach or join a coaching program. The money you spend becomes basically the fuel to show up even when you don't feel like it. That's why a lot of coaches, a lot of consultants, they say it themselves. Just paying money actually is what people that pay money for their coaching or for their consulting usually are the ones that gain the best results because they've paid for it. And so it becomes a fuel for them to show up and to make their money's worth in a way. Otherwise, they've just wasted it for nothing. And so external commitments can keep you accountable, but internal lock-ins can also be just as strong when you build them into your self-image. So identity lock-ins are when you tie behavior so closely to who you are that skipping them feels like betrayal. If you build the story of I'm an athlete, missing training feels like breaking a character. And so if you see yourself as a disciplined person, procrastination feels unnatural. So create personal rituals that cement this identity. It might be journaling before work every day or reciting a mantra before a workout. Rituals make those habits sacred instead of optional. And you can also use physical reminders of your identity. For example, wear a bracelet, keep a notebook, or design an environment that reinforces the self you're building. Symbols remind you daily of the standard you live by. So a writer can keep a pen and a notebook everywhere, not just to write, but as a signal. This is who I am. A disciplined person dresses intentionally every morning, even if they're working from home. The uniform becomes part of the identity lock-in. Readers, people that want to cement the identity of someone that reads books, bring a book everywhere. And so identity locks keep you anchored. But the truth is, life will always throw chaos at you. Systems only work if they can withstand the storms of bad days, low energy, and unexpected stress. So the final layer of lock-ins is really designing systems that account for failure. You will have off days, but resilience means those days don't spiral into weeks. The system pulls you back on track quickly. So create non-negotiable minimums. Even on your worst day, you can still do a 10-minute workout, read one page, or write one sentence. Minimums prevent all or nothing collapses. So you can also build recovery protocols. If you miss a habit, your rule is to always get back on track the next day, and never let 2 misses in a row stack. Missing once is human. Missing twice is habit erosion. So if you miss the gym on Monday, for example, you guarantee a short session on Tuesday. If you skip journaling one night, you double down the following morning. With routines, with automation, with commitments and resilience in place, you're no longer relying on the fragile willpower. You're carried by systems that make success the default. And once those systems are in place, the final step is just zooming out to review the journey and turn insights into action steps you can execute immediately. So let's go over the review. We talked about why doing hard things matters. We talked about the sources of resistance. We talked about overcoming initial resistance. We talked about dopamine and environment control, identity and mindset transformation, leveraging motivation and rewards, practical routines and lock-ins, the review, and your action items for the day or the next few days. First, strip away your fast dopamine drains this week and delete the apps, hide the snacks, cut the noise, and build one environment cue that forces the right action, like laying out your gym clothes the night before or keeping a book on your pillow. Once you've done that, choose one identity you want to claim and back it with evidence. Cast a daily vote for it in the smallest possible way. 1 page written, 1 set in the gym, 1 conversation started. Each action will lock the identity tighter. And then finally, implement one bundling strategy today. Pair a hard task with something you already enjoy, like listening to music only while studying or watching a favorite show only on the treadmill. Make the effort its own gateway to reward. So with that being said, I hope this training brought a lot of value. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to hit the like button, comment below to let me know what you liked and what you would like to see next. Subscribe to the channel for more. If you want to work with me, click the second link in the description. And if you want to join the free community to get this document as well as this training, then click the first link in the description. With that being said, again, thank you for being here, and I'm going to see you in the next one.